Hey there, everybody. We are here creating a tier list for all of the legendary cards in Into the Inklands. And I know it's not the most original idea ever. I know I'm not the first person to do this, but it seemed like fun. And I thought, maybe I have some unique insight to give as a, top player who has now had a chance to play with a number of these cards to get a feel for how good they actually are. So I think we'll just start here in what I think is set order with Kita. Now, Kita is a card that I definitely expect to see some play. It's not the sort of broken card that's going to warp the format around it. You're not going to see decks built around Kita or anything like that, but it will show up here and there, I think. It's just costed right for its abilities and its role. It has a decent ability, which I think is actually pretty reasonable as a curve topper in an aggro deck. The ability to quest with something like a Lilo or a Maleficent 1-drop for 2 that is generally pretty weak to getting challenged back. You can then play Kita after questing with them, and then maybe you'll get an extra quest with 1 or 2 of your characters to finish out a game in 2 quick bursts, which is kind of nice. And I think that we'll probably see 1 or 2 Kita as, a tech card in Amber aggressive decks going forward. Beyond that, I think the 3/5 stat line, especially as a shift 3, is kind of perfect for an Amber deck. The fact that you can shift Kita on turn 3, quest with it for 2, then when it becomes unexerted on your next turn, you could do something like challenge a Snake Mim or a Fox Mim or other character, put some damage on Kita, take out another opposing character, and then draw 3 with Rapunzel, I think is sort of a really, really nice line that's available to you with a card like this. And so, yeah, I think it's definitely a decent card. Having an ink cost of 5 is also kind of perfect for something like a Steel Song deck. Obviously, this can sing A Whole New World. It can sing Grab Your Sword, and for that reason, I'm going to put it in B tier. Definitely a good card. Not a format warping card, but a good card for sure. Next up, we have Prida. Now, Prida is a really powerful card, and a card I expect to see some play. It's just missing 1 or 2 things, I think, to make it one of the best cards in the set. The fact that it's a 1/6 that comes down on turn 6 and gets you 2 ink worth of value is really, really nice. You can play this, perhaps early, have something like a dock, but you play this, you're going to get 2 free ink worth of value. The turn it comes into play, it's going to quest for 2 almost every single time, and it's going to get you 2 more free ink worth of value by getting another 2-drop the turn it quests. On top of having 2 lore, which is pretty decent in an aggro deck, I think this is a card that's going to see some play as a curve topper in some aggro decks, especially if they're willing to go all the way up to 6. Now, the fact that it does cost 6 is a little bit awkward, since I think a lot of aggro decks do kind of want to stop their curve at 5. Plus, it being uninkable means it's going to be hard to jam 4 copies of this in a lot of decks. So I think we'll see it probably as a 1, 2, or 3 of, as a curve topper in Amber aggro decks going forward, or perhaps in some sort of mid-range deck like a Ruby Amber Mufasa deck. Now, on raw power level alone, I actually think this is an A tier card. Its really only downside is that I'm not sure it's going to find a home. Steel is looking to be really, really powerful in this set, so I think that the sort of aggro deck that Prida would be optimal in is maybe not going to be good just based on the metagame. Now, Jafar. Okay, I think everyone knows about Jafar at this point, The word has gotten out. People were talking about A Whole New World Jafar the moment this card was spoiled, and I think that interaction alone warrants an S tier for Jafar. Now, I don't know that the Jafar Whole New World decks are going to be top tier decks in the metagame, but I do know that they're going to be present, people are going to play it, and that ability is unique to Jafar alone. There's basically no other card in the game that you can play from your hand and use to gain 7 or even 14 or God forbid 21 lore all in one turn, all uninteractable. And I think based on that alone, this is an S tier card. Now, I think without A Whole New World, Jafar is probably a solid B tier card. We know from something like Goat Merlin that the ability to get lore sort of in an uninteractable way is really, really powerful. It doesn't happen that often in Lorcana. Jafar can do that, and I think it's a good card. I'll just leave it in S tier and not talk too much more about it. Now, Maleficent. This Maleficent, unfortunately, I do think is pretty bad. It has a few problems. Primarily, its body. The 2/3 stat line for 5 is just not good enough. I mean, this dies to smash without getting any value. It competes with the Queen, which can draw cards. So for this card to be better than the Queen, you have to want both the lore and the cards. And I think if you're using a 5-drop to draw cards, oftentimes you'll care more about the size of your body and the card than you will about the lore in the card. And then on top of that, I think it compares pretty unfavorably to something like Daisy Duck from the last set, right? Daisy Duck is the same stat line, costs 4, and when you quest with it, you get 2 lore and 1 card worth of value. And that card basically saw little to no play after the first few weeks in the Rise of the Floodborn metagame. Now this costs 1 more. I just don't see this Maleficent seeing play. If you want to draw cards, I mean, look at something like Rabbit Merlin. Rabbit Merlin's also a 2/3, draws 2 cards guaranteed, and comes into play 1 turn sooner, plus has amazing synergy with the Snake and Fox Mims. So I think this is a D tier card. I don't think you're going to see a lot of Maleficent, unfortunately, because I wish it was good. I just don't think it is. Now, Milo Thatch, I think there are a lot of people high on this card. I am not one of them. I think that I look at this card and I see sort of Big Archer Bell from last set. It has the same sort of problem where it comes down late, it's uninkable, so it's not very versatile, and it has a powerful ability, but it's kind of hard to actually use it, right? I mean, if you play this early by shifting it, your opponent's not likely to have a ton of characters in play, and say you quest for 3 with it and they take it out with a Maui. Okay, I mean, you get to bounce your opponent's characters, but really you're just healing their Maui. I don't know. The ability is powerful. Certainly if you could play it and then deliberately remove it on your own, you could use that as, you know, a one-sided bounce, but that's a lot of hoops to jump through compared to something like Grab Your Sword, which is often a one-sided board wipe and doesn't require all this setup. To me, I think there's some potential here. The fact that it quests for 3, the fact that it has shift, and the fact that it has a pretty good ability when it works, warrants at least the C tier, but I definitely don't think it's better than that. On to Ursula. Ursula is broken. I have had a chance to play Ursula in a number of different decks now. I've tried Ursula in Green Steel. I've tried Ursula in an Emerald Amethyst aggro deck, and in both cases, the card was absolutely crazy. I think this is going to be an easy S tier card. I think Ursula is going to be the sort of card we see throughout the entirety of this metagame and going forward. Basically, every song that costs 3 or less that gets printed works well with Ursula. They printed Strike a Good Match in this set, which means there's now 4 inkable, decent songs you can pair with Ursula, no matter what other ink you pair Ursula with. But yeah, copying Friends on the Other Side, copying Let the Storm Rage On, copying Strength of a Raging Fire, just crazy, crazy, crazy powerful ability. And this card, more than basically any other card on this list, is the scariest thing my opponent can play. I mean, when I see Ursula come down on turn 3, I'm like, oh lord, because there's so many cards that it threatens to take over the game with. On to Hydra. Hydra is a weird card in the sense that if this were printed in set 1 and in the set 1 metagame, it would have been pretty good, I think. There was a lot of mid-range battles. There were a lot of slow plotting games determined by getting value with big characters on board, but Lorcana has kind of evolved past that sort of metagame, and so I just don't know that Hydra is going to be good enough. It also has to compete with Lady Tremaine, it has to compete with the new Madame Medusa. I just can't imagine playing an uninkable 6-drop that comes into play and gets no value the turn you played it. It seems high risk. I think this card is worse than Maui, and I want to like it. It seems pretty powerful if you get to, you know, play with it for a turn or 2. I'm just not sure how likely that is to happen and if it's worth the risk of an uninkable in your deck. And as a result, I have to put it in C tier. I don't think it's unplayable. I just really don't want to play it. Now, Jim Hawkins, on the other hand, Jim Hawkins is a card that has impressed. It's a very good card. I think when you just read the card, it's pretty obviously powerful. I mean, it's a 5-drop, but it gets you 4 ink worth of value the turn it comes down by playing a 4-cost location for free. This is really, really strong with the RLS Legacy in Ruby. If you pair it with something like Amethyst, you can put the Queen's Castle in play for free, and the Queen's Castle is absolutely bonkers. And this is the sort of card that only gets better when more locations are printed, right? We don't know what 4-drop locations we'll get in future sets, but you can bet that some of them will be good with Jim Hawkins. So I think Jim Hawkins has to go in S tier. It enables location decks, especially like mid-rangey location decks. It gets a ton of value. It's already good in this set, specifically with RLS Legacy and the Queen's Castle for sure. Probably decent in a Pirates deck, in a Ruby Steel Pirates deck. So yeah, Jim Hawkins, it's 9 ink worth of cards in one card. It's a very, very good. Onto Grammatala, a card I am not super high on. I know some people have been trying it in like a blue steel type deck where you've got Fishbone Quill, where you've got 2-drop Grammatala that you can shift onto, where you've got How Far I'll Go as a new song that enables this sort of ability, but I just don't see it. I haven't been impressed with it playing against it. I haven't tried playing it myself, admittedly, but I think that the biggest problem with Grammatala is, like, if you compare Grammatala with Jafar, who has a somewhat similar ability, Grammatala's is just way worse. It's so much harder to get cards in your inkwell, and cards in your inkwell are harder to use to win a game than just raw cards are, so you kind of would rather be trying to draw cards than put cards in your inkwell anyway, for the most part, especially if you've already got a 7-drop in play. So I think that there's some potential here. I don't think this is a horrible, unplayable card, but I don't see it yet, and I'm going to put it in C tier for that reason. I'm not convinced by Grammatala. Maybe someone will convince me, and I hope they do, but for now, C tier. The Lucky Dime. The Lucky Dime. Well, it's certainly a fun card. There's some definite potential here. I think that if you can make the Lucky Dime work, it will win you games. There's no question about that. The question is it worth the risk and the setup? I mean, this is a 7-cost, uninkable item that basically does nothing on its own. And I think, to me, that's a problem. It's the sort of card I don't want to put in a deck. It's the sort of card I don't want to rely on in my deck. I would rather play Tamatoa, a card that's just good on its own, right, in an item deck than the Lucky Dime. Now, obviously, the Lucky Dime is harder to remove. You know, you can get multiple uses out of it pretty easily. That said, I just don't think this is the sort of card that's worth actually trying to build around. Obviously, I think it has some potential, but I don't think I can justify putting it any higher than C tier as a card that I think has an outside shot at being relevant, but we'll see. Now, Mickey Mouse Trumpeter. This is the sort of card that I looked at and thought was going to be really, really powerful. And then the more I thought about it, the worse and worse my outlook on this card got. I mean, first of all, being uninkable and sort of being a bad card on its own, kind of like the Lucky Dime, is a huge, huge negative in my book. It's the sort of card that you will draw in some games, and you'll be very, very sad, because you literally can't do anything with it, and it dies to basically any piece of removal at all, right? Like, it'll just incidentally die to Tinkerbell coming into play. It'll die to Grab Your Sword. Just anything. And you're only ever going to get to use the ability one time, right? Because it's a 0/1. If your opponent has any character in play, any character at all, this character will not survive a second turn. So then the question becomes, how powerful is the ink cheating effect on this? And it's pretty decent. I like the idea of, say, playing this in a Sapphire deck or an Amber deck where you've got 1 jump ahead, or something like Lantern to play this on turn 3. And then on turn 4, you can cheat something into play. But if you think about the cards you're cheating into play, I mean, there just aren't that many cards in Lorcana that will win a game on their own. If you think about something like Maleficent, which is maybe the most played super expensive card in Lorcana up to this point, cheating a Maleficent into play would be good, but it won't win you the game. And I think that's a problem, right? Because Mickey Mouse is a high-risk card, and so if you're going to play a high-risk card, you need to have a high reward. And I just don't think there is a card rewarding enough to cheat into play at this point to justify putting Mickey Mouse in a deck. Now, it is the sort of card that could potentially get broken in the future, because we don't know what crazy high-cost cards they will print. So I'm going to put it in D tier, but this is the sort of card that I think has future set potential, right? Who knows? You know, maybe they'll print a 10-cost card that enters, draws 4, and, you know, has Ward and Quest for 4, something absolutely ridiculous, at which point, obviously, Mickey Mouse Trumpeter goes up in value. And now, on to Robin Hood. Robin Hood is perhaps my favorite card in the set, just because it has so much text, and it's all relevant. It's just the perfect, well-rounded card. It can fit into almost any steel deck. You know, the 3/6 stat line, it quests for 2, it challenges well, it gains lore when challenging, right? So you can use this as an aggressive quester, you can use this as a really strong board control card. Most of the time, when you lose Robin Hood, you will get a card back based on the draw ability. It's just extremely, extremely strong. It also benefits from having multiple really good characters it can shift onto, right? It has a Goons, it has the 1/3 pinging Robin Hood that you can shift onto, which do a lot to improve this character's value. It's also a 5-drop character in Steel, and we know what 5-drop Steel characters can do. They can sing A Whole New World, they can sing Grab Your Sword, another very powerful ability. And when you look at the sort of decks that often do that, something like a Steel Song deck, right? This card is a 3/6. It pairs extremely well with Rapunzel, right? And this card rewards you for challenging. So you can play a Robin Hood, and now every turn from 3 onward, you are threatening to shift into the 3/6 Robin Hood, challenge your opponent's characters, get value, get lore at the same time, and then draw with Rapunzel if you're playing Steel Song. And I think that is really, really, really strong. I think as far as downsides, it really only has 2, and they're not huge downsides. I think downside 1 is that it doesn't do any one thing really, really well. It's not the best character for gaining lore. It's not the best character for drawing cards. It's not the best character for challenging. But it does so many jobs well enough that I don't think you can put it anywhere other than S tier. Its other downside is that it is a 5-cost steel card, and there is another 5-cost steel card in the game that is definitely amongst the best cards in the game. So you could argue that they maybe fight for slots, but I don't necessarily think that's true. I think 5 is a cost where you can have more than 4 characters in your deck and be happy about it, especially given that this one has shift. So yeah, I think that's my tier list. I like where I place things. I would say everything S through B tier are cards that I am confident will see play in top tier tournament decks at some point. These cards I put in C tier are things that I think are fringe playable. Maybe they'll show up, maybe they won't, but it's going to require a deck to sort of coalesce around them, I think, to make them viable. And these D tier cards are cards I think I would be pretty shocked to see in a top 8 list in this format. But hey, maybe I'm wrong. I'd love to be proven wrong. Overall, I think these legendaries are definitely better than the Rise of the Floodborn legendaries, and I'm excited to play with them. So yeah, thank you so much. Let me know down in the comments which of my takes were the absolute worst. What did I get right? What did I get wrong? What do you think about these cards? And yeah, thank you for watching. Catch you next time.